Welcome to my presentation on a current issue in education, home violence and abuse. In this presentation, I will respond to a dozen prompts to explain in detail how this issue is impeding some students' rights to accessing education in a safe and secure environment. What is the extent of this issue? The legal definition for child abuse comes from a 1974 Federal Act, CAPTA, which defines child abuse and neglect. Child abuse falls into four main categories, which compare parents and caregivers to always act in ways that prevent the imminent risk of serious harm. The four categories are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. This hyperlink will provide further details, including the California-specific laws on page 13 through 15. What are the signs that this issue may be a problem? Well, how exactly is child abuse impeding some students' rights to accessing education? Rod Page, the U.S. Secretary of Education, said, "Sadly, we live in a culture without role models, where millions of students are taught the wrong values or no values at all. This culture of callousness has led to a staggering achievement gap, poor health status, overweight students, crime, violence, teenage pregnancy, and tobacco and alcohol abuse. Good character is the product of good judgments made every day." So this includes all types of abuse. If they're taught the wrong values, then that's going to be things like physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. If they're taught no values at all, then that's going to be things like neglect. Clearly, the burden of having to cope with such abuse in a home environment does not prepare a child to come to school to learn. Such stress is often associated with health and emotional problems, failure to achieve, behavioral problems at school, and dropping out of school. From reading through these quotes, we can recognize that students who suffer from child abuse will not be able to fully engage with the academic context in ways that I've summarized here at the top: poor health, poor decisions, and poor academic performance. Who does this impact? Well, the children, as expected, children are the victims impacted from child abuse, inflicted from their parents or caregivers. In 2008, 772 children suffered child abuse. And since then, the percent distribution has remained roughly the same, with 71% receiving neglect, 16% physical abuse, 9.1% sexual abuse, and 7.3% psychological or emotional abuse. Where is abuse and neglect most likely to occur? Some suspect that neglect and abuse stem from financial problems. Students are those who are most at risk, live in dangerous environments that lead to health risk and threats to their safety. Their own parents may be so busy coping with several other jobs or their own problems that they cannot support their own children. Sociologists and public health scholars hypothesize that unemployment and the resulting stress, anger, and low self-esteem are major risk factors in child maltreatment. Poverty is associated with greater incidence of child abuse and neglect. Others suspect poor adult decisions, such as substance abuse. The structures of families who are experiencing the effects of financial problems, substance abuse, or violence, for example, can easily crumble. Is culture to blame? Well, that's a controversial issue. Some refuse to consider culture at fault, expecting that this would lead to an unjustly blaming the victim. Assuming that the victim's identity is tied to their culture, any conclusion which found the culture at fault would by extension hold the victim at fault as well. Others assign limited fault to culture by considering different circumstances separately, expecting that this is necessary to prevent victims of abuse from becoming the perpetrators later in life. When generations of victims become perpetrators, some argue that a subculture of abuse needs to be held at fault, and that the victims must be held accountable to do their part to break the cycle. Another controversy involves state rights. Other controversies arise as states exercise their rights in different ways. Withholding of medical care, for example, is one way. In one example, California is among 31 states who provide exceptions, meaning they do not consider it child abuse to withhold medical care from children on the basis of religious reasons. Is the problem increasing or decreasing? As shown in the chart, the total number of child abuse cases has reduced from 772,000 to 702,000 since 2008. So why do we say the problem is increasing? Because the Great Recession of 2008 constrained resources for reporting and investigating all instances of child abuse. What are the effects of this problem on school and climate? Well, the symptoms of child abuse, poor health, poor decisions, and poor academic performance are all addressed with federal funding and the support of safe and supportive schools known as S3. What are the effects of this problem on other student behaviors? Well, as we said in the previous slide, many victims of child abuse end up behaving in self-destructive ways. So they're going to suffer from poor health and emotional problems, poor decisions, and poor academic performance. Other behaviors include children and young people who are abused or neglected may arrive at school hungry, bruised, and depressed. They may arrive at school and seem to have little desire to leave the safety of the school. What are the effects of this problem on allocation of funding? School budget cuts should keep a full-time nurse at each school site to assist with identifying child abuse and treating the symptoms of child abuse. As mentioned, too many schools share a nurse with one or more schools, if they have a nurse at all. Since having a school nurse results in a return on investment, there should be no budgetary decision to not have a nurse on staff. Also, since the abused children will be reluctant to leave the school, they should be given opportunities to participate in after-school programs. What are the effects of this problem on teacher and administration attention? All school personnel must report suspected abuse, including the principal. Beyond just teachers and principals, state laws commonly obligate instructional assistants, cafeteria workers, custodians, and other staff to report abuse. In one bad example, a principal who failed to report possible abuse was required to complete 40 hours of community service to drop a misdemeanor charge. Why would someone hesitate to report? Well, some fear reporting will cause a breakdown in student-teacher-parent relationships and the possibility of lawsuits alleging invasion of privacy, assault, or slander. Their faith should be diminished, however, by statutes that grant them immunity for acting in good faith. What is the teacher's role in responding to this problem? Most child abuse reports originate from teachers who are legally required to report reasonable suspicion that abuse or neglect is occurring. Notice that teachers are the primary source for child abuse reports, submitting 17%. Also note that only reasonable suspicion is necessary to require a child abuse report.
Training. All adults who participate in the education of California students are strongly encouraged to complete this online training. Child abuse and neglect have a lasting and profound impact on children and their families. Thank you for the work you're doing to keep our children safe.
As parents, we are naturally concerned about the health and safety of our children. We want to provide them with nurturing environments and adults who care for them as we do and support them as they learn and grow. Unfortunately, once in a while, there are adults in our children's lives who do not have their best interest in mind and hurt children physically, sexually, and emotionally. That's why it is important for parents, educators, coaches, and other mandatory reporters in children's lives to learn to spot physical, sexual, and emotional abuse with the ultimate understanding of the importance of reporting and an understanding of the reporting process.
What are some examples of unsuccessful efforts to deal with this problem? Unsuccessful efforts include using digital surveys and trying to build self-esteem. When looking for data, girls are less responsive to digital versus paper surveys. Also, efforts to improve self-esteem alone is ineffective because it fails to stop the victims of child abuse from acting in self-destructive ways. So what are examples of successful efforts to deal with this problem? We need to help students get a more mature attitude towards character education. Children who are resilient are able to cope effectively with stress. They believe in their own self-efficacy, and can handle change and have good social skills. And that makes them less likely to become abusers in adulthood because mature students will be less likely to respond poorly to being overburdened with financial problems, substance abuse, or dysfunctional families. The therapy for such people should consist not of building self-esteem, as they already feel superior to others, but of cultivating self-control and instilling modesty and humility. Teachers must hold students accountable for actively participating in their own education. The teacher's job is not to entertain me, but to guide my learning, which depends upon my active participation. See? And this last quote summarizes the solution to our original problem. How do we deal with child abuse when it is impeding some students' rights to accessing education in a safe and secure environment? To be effective, child education requires adults to act like adults in an environment where children are respected and feel physically and psychologically safe to engage in the academic and social activities that prepare them best for later decision making. In closing, as teachers, we must trust in good faith that the authorities will properly deal with the abusers. Our main concern is not to deal with the broken men, but to build strong children for the future.